Morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church in Columbia, South Carolina, where we're part of the ELCA. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. A few years ago, I spent a week of Pastor Gary Live episodes considering mountains in the Gospel of Matthew. You see, in Matthew, the mountains are high points, not just geographically, but key events in the story of Jesus all happened on mountains. It almost seems as if the high point of a mountain, it almost seems as if the high points of a mountain point to the significance of what happened there. As we continue our focus this week on various church names and the meaning behind them, and speculate some on why someone might name a church after all that, for our final day today, let's turn to some churches that have chosen their name after a biblical mountain. We will start with Mount Horeb. You might think we would know where it was, but we don't. Mount Horeb is a mountain in the Bible with something of a subtitle, the Mountain of God. Here, Moses encountered the burning bush, the Ten Commandments were given, and Elijah went to hear the still small voice. Wait, you are thinking, all that happened on Mount Sinai. Well, yes. The thing is, we aren't sure where Mount Sinai was either. If you see it marked on a map, that is speculation. And there is debate among Bible scholars exactly where either of these mountains are. To add to the confusion, sometimes the Bible calls where those events happened Mount Sinai, and other times Mount Horeb. Mount Sinai has been thought to be at the southern point of the Sinai Peninsula, while Mount Horeb is thought to be located in what is the modern-day country of Jordan, across the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt. If you have a lot of time and want to delve into an unsolvable question, just look into this for a while. What's more important is indeed what happened on this mountain of God. Wherever it was the place where God appeared. God appeared to Moses in the burning bush. Then God appeared to God's newly freed Hebrew people and gave them the Ten Commandments and more. When Elijah had a crisis of faith, he fled to the mountain, and there he encountered God, and his faith and courage were renewed. Perhaps those things point to why a church might call itself Mount Horeb. They are saying that in this place, in our community, God can be found. This is where you meet God, and this is where you can be spiritually transformed by that encounter. Another interesting biblical mountain that churches sometimes use to name themselves is Mount Hermon. Now, you've probably heard of Mount Hermon, but you might not be so familiar with what happened there. Mount Hermon is at the very northern edge of Israel and actually marks the northern boundary of the Promised Land. It is a tall mountain and for much of the year is snow-capped. These two features imply a couple of things that might make one use the name for a church. First, its size and height imply majesty and beauty, pointing to God's majesty, stability, and the grandeur of God's creation. Secondly, as the boundary of the Promised Land, the mountain pointed to God's protection and strength, and God watching over God's people. More, several Psalms describe Mount Hermon, and it becomes a symbol of abundant blessing, refreshment, and spiritual vitality. These Psalms also point to the unity of God's people. No wonder some churches choose this name. These are powerful things to say about God and about your family of faith. A third, lesser-known mountain mentioned in the Bible that churches sometimes use to name themselves is Mount Gilead. In those days, with much less medical knowledge than we have today, they found a valuable resin around Mount Gilead that was useful in healing. Jeremiah referred to it, and we even have a hymn that speaks of the balm of Gilead. More, Gilead was a place of refuge and strength. The mountain is east of the Jordan River, and the tribes of Gad and Manasseh were given land there. It became symbolic as a refuge and a place of strength. Later on, Gideon gathered his army there before battle, and almost all of them were sent home. And that's a story about faith over fear and trusting God when things seem impossible. There's more, but these references in particular point to why a church might name itself after Mount Gilead. A church might choose this name to communicate healing and restoration, that is, the balm of Gilead, strength and refuge, courage and faithfulness, a place where God meets people in their struggles, and a name that feels both comforting and strong. Now, you may remember that I started all this on Monday with a story of seeing a church named Mount Nebo, and how in the Bible, Mount Nebo was where Moses looked over into the promised land before he died. I spoke of the beauty of naming a church a place from which you can glimpse the promised land. Well, I also wanted to look into why someone might name a church Pisgah or Mount Pisgah. And we end this week as we began. Pisgah is another name for Mount Nebo. So if you see a church named Pisgah, they are saying the same thing. From here, among us, you can receive God's promise and blessing. I don't know about you, but I have enjoyed this week, and on top of that, I have learned a lot. I've also got a lot more church names to look into and think about for a future week sometime. Maybe I should end this week with 2 hanging questions. I hope you give these a lot of thought. Why do you think your church is named what it is called? If you were going to name a church, what name would you use? Thanks for sharing these moments with me, and remember to let this day belong to God.